Elizabeth Clare Prophet, noted author, lecturer, and educator, interviews the special people who provide the missing dimension to the news that affects you. Courageous men and women from all over the world who have taken a stand for truth and justice and become spokesmen for the flame of freedom. Listen now as Elizabeth Clare Prophet and her guest discuss critical issues of the day. This week, Mrs. Prophet talks with ZECHARIA SITCHIN, author of The 12th Planet, The Stairway to Heaven, and The Wars of Gods and Men, who presents his case for a planet in our solar system beyond Pluto, whose astronauts have been visiting Earth for 450,000 years, and whose wars led to a nuclear holocaust in the Middle East 4,000 years ago.
Welcome to Summit University Forum, where the flame of freedom speaks. Today our guest is ZECHARIA SITCHIN. He was born in Russia and raised in Palestine, where he acquired a profound knowledge of modern and ancient Hebrew and other Semitic and European languages, the Old Testament, the history of archaeology of the Near East. Mr. Sitchin attended the London School of Economics, was graduated from the University of London, majoring in economic history. A leading journalist and editor in Israel for many years, he now lives and writes in New York. He is a member of the Israel Exploration Society, the American Oriental Society, and the Middle East Studies Association of North America. In 1976, Mr. Sitchin published the first of his Earth Chronicles series, The 12th Planet, a revolutionary work which made a case for the existence of another planet in our solar system, whose astronauts have been visiting the Earth for 450,000 years. It was followed in 1980 by The Stairway to Heaven, and in June of this year he published The Wars of Gods and Men, a startling work that provides evidence that the wars of men began with the wars of the gods, wars for the control of this Earth, which began on their own planet and led to a nuclear holocaust in the Middle East 4,000 years ago. ZECHARIA Sitchin, welcome to Summit University Forum. Thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for having me. I've been waiting a long time to be invited.
Well, this is the long-awaited moment for us. We're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
We have tried to deliver your message. We have studied your books. Now we want to hear it from the expert. So won't you tell us how you got started in this discovery?
Well, Elizabeth, the discovery, as you call it, has really been a journey perhaps in something that could be best described as a time machine, because this is a journey or a vehicle by which we could go back in time, but by going back we also can take a glimpse, I believe, of the future. And my own journey, on which I hope those who read my books and those who will listen and see us, my own journey began when I was a schoolboy. And don't ask me how long ago it was. I was studying in what was then Palestine, the Old Testament in its original Hebrew language. And that, I must stress, made a lot of difference, because most people who learn or read the Bible, the Old Testament, part of it, in English or in French or whatever other language, or even in the Greek, which was the first European language into which it was translated, are really reading interpretations. I was fortunate enough to learn it in its original Hebrew, and we were reading the wondrous tales about how heaven and earth were created, how the Adam was created, and we reached the very exciting tale of Noah and the ark. And in this chapter, the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis, before the story of Noah, before the story of the deluge begins, there are 8 very enigmatic verses which evidently are the remnant of some longer story that was edited out or cut short or abbreviated. And of those 8 verses, what is mostly known or common, because it's used by preachers, Sunday preachers, is that one verse included in them that says, those were the days just before the deluge, when there were giants upon the earth, and they married the daughters of men, had children by them, and so on. And when we reached those verses, the teacher said, those were the days when there were giants upon the earth. I raised my hand, and I remember that vividly because that is the origin of, of this. And I said, excuse me, teacher, but why do you say giants when the Hebrew word in the Bible is Nephilim, which comes from the Hebrew verb nafol, which can be translated as to fall down, to come down, to descend. And I said, doesn't it mean that they were those who had descended, who had come down to earth from the heavens? And he said, Sitchin, sit down. You don't question the Bible. And of course I did not, as I understood it then until now, I did not question the Bible. I questioned an interpretation. And that was really the seed implanted in my mind. Who were the Nephilim? Why did the Bible, which is very precise in its selection of words and terminology, why did the Bible call them, describe them as those who had descended, who had come down? This was the beginning of my journey in time.
How did you conclude then that these were astronauts from other planets?
Well, at that time I didn't conclude it at all, because it was quite a long time ago where the only notion of traveling from Earth to another celestial body were the tales of Jules Verne, you know, the trip to the moon and so on. Nobody seriously believed in the possibility of leaving Earth and going somewhere else. And certainly the word astronaut, or what it stood for, wasn't even coined, was not known. What I did was, as I grew up and became interested in archaeology and the ancient languages of the Near East and the other studies that were necessary to put these writings together, what I did is what I started to read up on biblical commentators, to see what the commentators in the 20th century, in the 19th century, and even in much earlier times, what have they had to say about those 6 or 8 verses, and how did they interpret the word Nephilim? Now, to my great surprise, I discovered that many commentators, even some who are interpreting or commenting on the Bible verse by verse, including one, for example, Dr. Sarna, whose commentary on the Bible is the textbook in the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And he comments on the Bible, on the, say, book of Genesis, verse by verse. When he comes to chapter 6, he just skips the 8 verses. He begins from verse 9. They don't exist. But a Jewish commentator in the 19th century, over 100 years ago, I must point it out, by name of Malbim in Russia, wrote and said that Nephilim means, what the Bible means is that there were superior beings who had come to earth from another place in the heavens, and they married the daughters of men, and they had children by them. He hurries to say then, those are the beliefs of the hidden peoples, and of course not of Orthodox Jews. But that was the opening to me, that the answer to the question, who were the Nephilim, and eventually, as you said, that they were astronauts or visitors to Earth from another planet, the clue to me was in that interpretation, that commentary, 19th century commentary by the Malbim. Now this led me to, therefore, to study what those people believed in. And we all know the so-called Greek mythologies about Zeus and Aphrodite and the other gods, or they call them the immortals, who were so unhuman, so superior because they could fly in the skies. They had weapons that could shoot lightnings. They were so much superior. They could read humans' minds. And at the same time, they were so human. They loved and they were jealous, and they had all the failings of us mortals. They were very interesting, but who really were they?
I really have to say that it was not until reading your latest book, The Wars of Gods and Men, that it finally occurs to one that these are no longer myths. These have some very concrete realities. Why don't you tell us about these?
Yes, to reach the answer to your question in this time machine, taking people back, what I found out was that the Greek, so-called Greek mythologies, and the Greeks were firm believers that the origin of their beliefs of their gods was in Egypt. They attributed it to the ancient Egyptians. As you know, Alexander the Great went in search of immortality. He started in Egypt searching for it. And as soon as he reached Egypt, he went to a very remote oasis in the western desert, because he was told that there he could hear an oracle confirming what he needed confirming. The reason he went to Egypt was that there was a rumor in the court of Macedonia that Philip was not his real father, that his real father was an Egyptian god by name of Ammon, which meant the hidden one, not hidden, but hidden, the hidden one. And he wanted confirmation of that, because if he were really the son of a god born by a human mother, he was entitled to become immortal, and he was seeking immortality. He went to that oasis, he heard some oracle, he entered the place alone. He came out and said, well, my semi-divine birth was confirmed to me, but about immortality I was told something that I don't understand, and I have to go on looking. He went to the south of Egypt, seeking an answer there. There he was told to go to the Sinai Peninsula, because he'll find the answer there. He didn't find it there, because there 2 angels in a tunnel guarding the waters of life told him to go to Mesopotamia, that he'll find the answer in Babylon. In Babylon he sought the word of the Babylonian god Marduk, but he didn't get it. And what he did hear in Babylon, finally explained to him what his destiny was. His destiny was to become immortal, but only by being remembered as a great conqueror, not physically. So therefore he went and built everywhere cities called Alexandria to make sure that he'll be remembered. So that was his immortality. So in a way, Elizabeth, what happened to Alexander the Great happened to me. I didn't go to ask or seek omens in all those places, but I found them in the ancient texts, which are the basis for my writings. Wherever you start your journey, in Greece, in Egypt, among the Hittites, you end up in Mesopotamia. The end of his journey and he died there in Babylon. The end of his journey is the beginning, or should be the beginning, of our journey.
So we come to Sumer.
We come to Sumer. The right word should really be Shumer. That is the Hebrew word for it. We say in English Sumer. And the word means the place of the guardians. The Egyptians, by the way, called their term for what we translate gods, with a small g, they called them Neteru, and that meant guardians. So Sumer, in Sumerian, was the land of the guardians. The Egyptians called their gods guardians. And
we also speak of guardian angels.
Guardian angels. There are many people who believe that there's still guardians among us, or that they have trained or educated or implanted their genes in some of us.
The question is, did these guardians teach the people of Sumer what they knew about astronomy, what we're just finding out about today, and what did they really know?
There's no doubt that they did, and I say no doubt not only because that is what the Sumerians said in the writings, in the text that they've left us, but among the achievements of the Sumerian civilization, which were really incredible, anything we can think of, the first of it was in Sumer, not just the use of the wheel and other technological innovations of irrigation in agriculture, in high-rise buildings. Some of their buildings were 7 stories high, as you know the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel that was a skyscraper. So it was a very high civilization 6,000 years ago. But most amazing, as you wanted me to point out, was their knowledge of astronomy, which was really astronomical. They knew of the complete solar system. As people know or should know, we have found out about the planets beyond Saturn only in the recent, I think, Uranus was discovered around 1750, something like that. Neptune about 100 or more years later. Pluto only about 50 years ago, when many of the Sumerian texts were found and first translated, including the astronomical ones. Those astronomers who tried to make sense of them didn't even know about Pluto yet. So the Sumerians have known of all the planets we know of, have described them, and have even depicted them pictorially. This is an enlargement of a depiction on a cylinder seal, and you can see here a depiction of the complete solar system, which sketch-like is this. This is the sketch of what you see there, up there. You can see that they knew that the sun, and not the earth as the Greeks 3,000 years after them believed, the sun is in the center. They knew of all the planets, and I compare it with our knowledge of the solar system, in their right positions, in their relatively right sizes. And they said, not only knew all that, they said there is one more planet, which you can see here, which is missing from our knowledge. And they had a tale which was read on a certain night after nightfall as part of the New Year celebrations. Their New Year celebrations lasted like the Jewish ones today, 10 days. And on the last night, a text, a poem, which scholars today call the Epic of Creation, was read and told the people what was known at the time of how the solar system was created, something that we ourselves are just trying to find out with all the sophisticated equipment we have today. And the tale is that at the beginning there were 3 celestial bodies: the sun, its messenger, for which they had a name, but we call it Mercury, and an ancient female planet, male-female, they call Tiamat, meaning mother of life. Then the other planets were created in pairs, 2 more here and 2 and 2, and so on and so forth, until the whole solar system was completed. But then an invader from outer space, a planet from some other solar system, how it escaped that solar system, what catastrophe had thrust it towards our solar system, those texts don't say. I don't know. But it came, it entered our own solar system, and as it was drawn into our solar system, ended up colliding with Tiamat, with that other olden planet, breaking it in 2. One half was smashed to bits and pieces and became the comets and the asteroid belt. One of the puzzles that our astronomers have no answer for is why the comets orbit in an orbit counter to the one of all the other planets. And the answer is that the invader, whom the Sumerians called Nibiru, the Babylonians named it Marduk, that invader has this clockwise orbit, whereas all the other planets have a counterclockwise. So when it smashed Tiamat to bits and pieces, half of it, it pulled all those bits and pieces, the asteroids, the comets, into the kind of orbit that it had. On the next orbit, returning to the what they called the place of the celestial battle, it thrust Earth to a new orbit, and Earth is really, according to the Sumerian tales, the unbroken half of Tiamat. This answers again many puzzles. For example, why on our planet all the continents began on one side? You know, the Platonic theory that the plates are spreading, but originally they were all on one side. On the other side, as we know, still to this day, there was this huge cavity, which is to this day still the Pacific Basin covered with water. In the process, Earth, this half, pulled with it the chief satellite of Tiamat, which they called Kingu, which we call the moon. So the moon is a remainder, unbroken remainder of Tiamat, pulled to a new orbit with the unbroken half, which became the Earth. This was their cosmogony, which they read and repeated, and was like their declaration of faith once a year as part of the New Year celebrations. They said, what happened to the invader, to Marduk itself? They said it got caught in a vast elliptical, almost comet-like orbit, returning to our vicinity once every 3,600 years. Now the question is, how did they know all that? This was the puzzle that I faced when I found out that this was their extraordinary, amazing knowledge. How did they know about all the planets that could not be seen with the naked eye? How did they know about this planet Marduk that orbits so far out that certainly cannot be seen? How did they know, for example, that Earth is the 7th planet? That's what Earth was called, the 7th planet. Now we all know that Earth is the 3rd planet, because from the Sun we say there's Mercury, Venus, and Earth. Now, if, however, you count from the outside in, if somebody who devised the system of numbering began with Pluto, and said Pluto is number 1, and Neptune is 2, Uranus is 3, Saturn is 4, Jupiter is 5, Mars is 6, Earth is the 7th planet. So all this evidence coming together led to the question which the Sumerians themselves have answered. And they said, those who had come from that planet, they told us all that. So if you say there's no such planet, and the question is there or isn't, and we can go into that too. If you say there's no such planet, so how come the Sumerians knew all that about all the other planets of which we do know? If there is such a planet, they say we know about it because those who came from it told us. So it's like a hermetically sealed circle. If you accept the circle here, you must complete it. About 2 years after my first book, The 12th Planet, was published, that astronomers at the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington have concluded that Pluto has a satellite, a small moon. Now that sounds like an insignificant discovery, so what? But that meant to them that Pluto alone could not account for disturbances, for perturbations, as they call it, in the orbits of the 2 planets neighboring it, Neptune and Uranus. And then they postulated that the only way this could be explained is that there must be one more celestial body beyond Pluto. They called it Planet X. Planet X meaning 2 things: the mystery planet, the one we don't know about, and also the Roman X10, the 10th planet. Because if you don't count the sun and the moon in the number of celestial bodies, then there are only 9 planets of which we know, plus Planet X, plus the 10th one. The Sumerians, for reasons which they explained, the sun, as they showed in their Epic of Creation, was the first member of the solar system, the central one. The moon, they said, is a celestial body in its own right because just before that celestial collision, it was in the process of separating and becoming a planet. But the celestial collision prevented it, and it was thrust to a new orbit together with the Earth, our Earth, and became our satellite. To show how much they knew, Elizabeth, is that they depict, and I don't want to go back to the previous depiction, they show Pluto not where it is today, because they say that Pluto started as a satellite of Saturn, but was pulled, thrust to its new present orbit by the invader on its continuing orbits. Our astronomers today surmise that Pluto began as a satellite of another planet. So even what we are finding out in that respect today, the Sumerians or their teachers had known already thousands and thousands of years ago.
So what is the next step for our astronomers to find out today? They're on the brink of the awareness of...
Well, the next step has been taken because NASA had agreed with the astronomers at the U.S. Naval Observatory that there is one more celestial body beyond Pluto. NASA has been searching for it. NASA, about 4 years ago, directed the 2 Pioneer spacecraft that have gone beyond Jupiter and Saturn and into outer space, has directed them to separate so that they would measure in about a year or 2 at the most, they would measure the gravitational pull on them. And if both of them detect the same gravitational pull, it means that the pull comes from a very far out celestial object which could be another sun or whatever in another solar system. But if one of them is subjected to a greater pull than the other, that means that it is nearing a celestial body, which then must be a planet, because the only way it could be there is if it orbits our sun. So NASA has done that about 3.5 years ago. Last year, NASA launched IRAS, which stands for Infrared Astronomical Station. It's a satellite that could detect celestial bodies which are very dim, could not be seen with normal telescopes, but could be seen through infrared light if they reflect some of it. And that IRAS has seen a celestial body about 4 times the size of Earth moving towards Earth, because on the 2 sweeps in that 1 year, 6 months and 6 months, in 6 months time difference between the 2 photographs, it was seen to be moving. It shifted position and moved towards Earth. Now, after the initial leak about it, suddenly there was a total denial of the whole thing. And when you contacted NASA or the people who have analyzed that, they said, we don't know what you're talking about, because but it was reported in the Washington Post and in other, there was a leak which they tried to plug. Now, this is another aspect altogether of why there seems to be a fear of acknowledging the possibility that we are not alone in our solar system. I don't have the answer for that, but it keeps puzzling me.
You don't have the fear. I don't have the fear.
No, I don't.
But do you believe that this is what they saw is the 12th planet?
What I call the 12th planet, what they call Planet X.
You're convinced they're one and the same?
Well, I would really be amazed if there are 2 unknown bodies. Amazed for 2 reasons. It would be a tremendous coincidence. And secondly, I believe so much in that the Sumerians knew what they were talking about. And if they said one more, I take their word for it.
So can you give us an estimate at the expected time of arrival of this 12th planet?
Well, it's not an easy question to answer, and one would have to get very technical in trying to answer it. I will try to answer it in my next book, because the 3 books are part of a 4-book concept under the overall umbrella title, The Earth Chronicles. It's not easy to answer because the planet, contrary to what many who may have even read my books, or many believe, does not just appear here like a comet, you know, that we can see it for 1 night or for 1 month and that's it. When it was seen, and there are even pictorial depictions of it by the Sumerians, it is depicted as a radiating planet that radiates its own heat and its own halo. Its symbol, by the way, was the cross. So the cross is not a symbol that began at the time of Christ. It goes back at least 6,000 years. And they saw it. There are texts that describe its progress in the skies as from the point that it could be seen until it disappeared. And that, as far as I can guess at the moment, may have lasted hundreds of years. Now, that does not mean that the visits or the landings or the comings and goings by the Nephilim, if we are to call them by their biblical name, that they exactly coincided, because they could have landed. That again involves space mechanics and space travel and other considerations on which I spent some time and got some help from people more expert on that than me. They could have landed on Earth before the planet could be observed if they chose one way of space travel. They could have landed after it was observed. Whichever way, they had to catch up with it once it was seen. So when is it coming back is really not a precise question. It's maybe a theological question, maybe a moral question, maybe a question that can affect our lives, our behavior, it should. But it's not one that's easy to answer. And hopefully when I write the 4th book, I'll be your guest again and we can go into that.
By all means. Now, it could then be observable for as much as 600 years before it would have any consequence.
Could well be, right.
Now, are we leading to the point that in those days, just before the flood of Noah, which you have said was triggered by the passage or the crossing of the 12th planet, in those days the presence of Nephilim would indicate that they came in advance of the arrival of the planet?
Oh yes, according to the Sumerian sources, and that's part of the... You see, each of my books can be read independently because there's enough information or enough of a basis in each one of them to understand. Each one of them looks at the story of what happened on Earth from a different viewpoint. The first one dealt mostly with the need, which I felt, the need to produce the evidence of what the Sumerians knew and the conclusion that there is one more planet from which others had come to Earth. The second book, The Stairway to Heaven, dealt with the same story but closer and closer to our times, to what some would even call historical times, because it deals with the adventures of a Sumerian king called Gilgamesh, of whom we know exactly when he lived, when he reigned at about 2700 BC, where he reigned, and Egyptian pharaohs who also went in search of immortality like Gilgamesh in afterlife. And that book therefore continues the story, but from the viewpoint of why did men search then and still searches for immortality? Why did people believe in antiquity that if they could join the so-called gods, if they could be taken aloft like Enoch was, or like the prophet Elijah, why would they then escape mortals' fate to die? The third book, which still takes the story ever closer to our times, again takes another look at the same story, more closer to our times, but a different look, and that is, why are there wars on Earth? Was man born a warrior? Do we fight because that's how we were born, to fight with each other? Or were we taught warfare? Were we made to fight wars? So the story, though it's looked at from different angles, really takes in each book the story from one time period to another, and it begins almost 500,000 years ago. It begins almost precisely 450,000 years ago, because then it was that they landed on Earth for the first time. And the details of the landing are extraordinarily clear, because the leader of the landing party, who was a great scientist in all fields of science, was known. His name was Enki. He led a group of 50 astronauts. We know how they landed because they splashed down in the waters of the Persian Gulf. We know where they set up their first Earth Station number 1. We know what they called it. They called it Eridu, which literally meant home away from home. And all the names for Earth, even in English, but certainly if you take the German word Erde, and the Persian word, and even the Hebrew Eretz, they all come from that name, Eridu. Eridu, Erde, earth. And that's how we look.
The god Enki. Is this an original?
No, it's a replica from the Louvre.
Well, speaking of replicas, why don't you tell us the creation story of these Nephilim and how they went about creating Homo sapiens?
Okay. It has to do with what you see here. This is the only statue or statuette of one of them, there were many, that has gold on it. And the reason is that it indicates the purpose for which he had come to Earth. As far as I could make from those tales, their planet was losing its atmosphere. They were at risk of annihilation, of seeing all life end on their planet. Due to various tales and circumstances, a court upheaval, and there's a very interesting Hittite tale that gives the information. The ruler that was deposed escaped in a spaceship to Earth. And I say spaceship not only because that was the only way to go from one planet to another, but also because those spaceships were depicted. And if there's anyone who still doesn't believe anything I'm saying, here is a 5,500-year-old depiction of a spacecraft. And we know exactly where it was, because it was between Mars, a six-pointed planet, because Mars was the sixth planet, and between Earth, whose number was 7, and you can see the 7 dots, and the moon accompanying the Earth. And this is one astronaut on Mars speaking to or being welcomed by someone on Earth. You see the wings to indicate he was an eagle. Their nickname was the Eagles, those who manned the spacecraft. And this is a spacecraft with its solar panels, as if you're looking at the design by NASA engineers.
Where was this record found?
In Sumer. All these are Sumerian artifacts.
How long have we had those tablets, that particular one?
Well, this tablet, which is found in the Hermitage Museum in Leningrad, was found almost 100 years ago, is known, has been published, was not found by me. But when you ask the scholar what does it depict, they say this is a mythological scene. That's what they say. So that deposed ruler escaped.
What was his name?
His name was Alalu.
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 Deposed by Anu.
Deposed by Anu. And he escaped to Earth in a spacecraft. He crash landed, according to the tale. And when he was on Earth, he discovered that Earth has gold. We don't know yet, but according to the Sumerians, Earth is the only place in the solar system that has gold. And maybe our scientists will confirm it in time. So in order to ingratiate himself, in order maybe to be allowed to rejoin civilization, he informed the people on Marduk, on Nibiru, on the 12th planet, that there's gold on Earth, and gold could be used to assure their survival, because by suspending gold particles in the atmosphere, they could protect it from further dissipation. So it was that they decided for Enki to lead a mission to Earth. And the first idea, and it's also depicted in Sumerian depictions which I reproduce in my books. The first idea was to extract the gold through some sophisticated process from the waters of the Persian Gulf. But this didn't work, or they didn't produce enough, whatever it was, so that on the next orbit of Nibiru Marduk, when it was closest to Earth, both Anu, who was now the leader on Nibiru, and a son of his, who was given the epithet name Enlil, meaning Lord of the Command, came down to Earth. Enki was also one of his sons. His name, epithet, meant Lord Earth. As it happened, both of them were only half-brothers, and many of the conflicts and the wars on Earth, and we can get further down the road into that, were due to the fact that there was this rivalry, conflict between two half-brothers. But when they came down, a decision had to be made whether to abandon the whole project and risk ending their civilization, maybe ending all life on their planet, or trying to obtain the gold in some other way. They knew by then that gold could be mined in southern Africa, in what was in recent times Rhodesia. Mines were found there, by the way, that have been dated to 30, 40, even 80,000 years ago. But I'm talking about 400,000 years ago. And a decision was made to start mining the gold in southern Africa. For that purpose, more of them came to Earth. In the end, there were a total of 600 on Earth. They were called, those who were on Earth were called Anunnaki, literally meaning those who from heaven came to Earth, which is exactly the meaning of Nephilim, those who had come down to Earth. Some of them remained in Mesopotamia, where Eridu was established, and they set up a total of 7 settlements. They had, in addition to the first station, Eridu, they had a metallurgical center where they smelted and refined the ores brought over from southern Africa. They had 2 beacon cities for the landing of the shuttlecraft. They had a spaceport called Sipar, which literally meant bird city. They had a medical center called Shurupak under the lordship or control of a female who was the chief medical officer. I'd like to point out, by the way, since I talk Enki and I talk Enlil, that they were not all males. And as time went on and another generation followed, one of the most famous was a goddess, a female called Ishtar. This was a statue of her. When this was discovered at a place called Mari, this is the statue. This is
Ishtar.
Ishtar. In a place called Mari, the archaeologists who discovered it took a photograph standing around the statue, and at the first glance you don't realize it's a statue because it's lifelike, it's life-size, and it's as if a woman is standing among them, but this is the statue. Now if you look at the design of what she was wearing, and you can see her helmet, especially from the back, you can see that she had a neck pack, some instrument panel. You can see something that looks like earphones. The 2 horns served no doubt as antennas. You see a hose, maybe for oxygen or for whatever other purposes. So this is obviously a pilot's or an astronaut's garb. There was another picture of her.
This is the first woman astronaut we know of, is it?
No, the first
the
one was the half-sister of Enki.
Enki.
Right. She was 3rd generation on Earth. Here's another depiction of her. And she looks like a World War I pilot, doesn't she?
Definitely. The goggles have it.
Right, everything. Except that here she didn't wear anything. She was the goddess of war and the goddess of love. The Greeks called her Aphrodite. Now, while we are on the subject of spacecraft and their landings, here is a depiction from an Egyptian tomb of a site in the Sinai Peninsula with what is, to me clearly, a rocket ship in its underground silo with the capsule for the astronauts above ground.
So it's subterranean.
In the Sinai Peninsula, right. So they came here about 450,000 years ago in search of gold. They brought 600 of them down. 300 of them, who were called Igigi, meaning those who observe and see, stayed in orbit, in Earth orbit, operated Earth stations, shuttlecraft, and were involved in taking up and transferring to motherships the gold, the refined gold, bringing down supplies, astronauts. People went back and forth. Now at some point, and the date is stated in the Sumerian writings, those who were working in the gold mines mutinied, and the tale of their mutiny in a text which scholars call the Epic of Atrahasis is told again in very great detail, almost as if somebody was describing the July 14th in France, the march on the Bastille, the day of the Revolution, how they marched with torches, how they put their tools on fire, how they surrounded the home of the commander of Enlil and actually held him in house arrest until a council of all the leaders was held. And the other leaders, not Enlil, but the other leaders said, they're right. This work is really so back-breaking, so such hard toil that it can't go on. So again, the question was, as once before, to abandon the whole project, which was necessary, or to find another solution. And then Enki said, why don't we create a Lulu Amelu, a primitive worker, who will go down to the mines and do the hard work for us? So it has to be a being that has intelligence, that has hands, that can hold tools, that can understand instructions, that can do what it's told. And the other said, well, where do you find on earth such a being? So he said, that being already exists. These are actually his words, as written down 5,500 years ago by the Sumerians. That being already exists. All we have to do is implant on it the mark of the Anunnaki, of us. And there are texts, very detailed texts, of which the biblical tales are just mentions of, how they went about engaging in genetic manipulation, taking the egg of a female ape woman, implanting in it the genes of one of their own young males, in what we call today an in vitro process. And once the egg was fertilized with this combined genetic material, they implanted it in the wombs of one of their own females, not back in an ape woman. There was a lot of trial and error. The first beings that were born as a result of that were defective, without hands or without some other limbs or without eyesight. It was not instant success. But after trial and error, they arrived at what they called the perfect model. These are the Sumerian words, a perfect model. And then they started to use that genetic combination by implanting those fertilized eggs in what the text term birth goddesses, 14 at a time, 7 male, 7 female, 7 male, 7 female, until they started to produce us, Homo sapiens, 300,000 years ago.
You've been watching Part 1 of Summit University Forum with Elizabeth Clare Prophet. Mrs. Prophet's guest today has been ZECHARIA SITCHIN, author of The 12th Planet. Don't miss Part 2 of this controversial discussion, as Sitchin continues to present his case for astronauts who have been visiting Earth for 450,000 years, and whose wars led to a nuclear holocaust in the Middle East 4,000 years ago. The views expressed by those interviewed at Summit University Forum are not necessarily those of Elizabeth Clare Prophet or the faculty of Summit University. The preceding public access program has been presented through the assistance of Summit University, Box A, Malibu, California, 90265. If you would like to know more, call this number or write this address.